Hi, welcome to this module on project management. I'm John Potter and I'll be your guide for this series during this module. In this first session, we're going to have a look at what projects are all about. Project Management Session 1. In this session of project management, we're going to introduce the nature of project working and introduce some of the basic concepts involved with projects. In particular, we're going to illustrate that effective leadership ability is now a very important part of the project manager's toolkit. In the past, the emphasis used to be on project planning techniques and project control. Today, because computers help us with most of the planning effort, the real emphasis for successful project work has to be on the leadership ability of the project leader and manager. Slide 2. The nature of project working. Now, projects are efforts to achieve objectives, and projects have a start, a middle and an end, making them different from operational activities which are performed regularly over time, such as, for example, payroll operation. However, there can be some overlap between project management and operational management in that development of operational effectiveness can often involve a change management project, and projects themselves may evolve into ongoing flow activity. An example of this might be a prototype vehicle, which initially starts as a development project and then develops into a flow production line if the project is successful. There are core skills involved in project management, including identifying and agreeing on project objectives, scheduling and estimating, and we're going to look at all of these during this program. In addition, other issues such as managing risk, communication and dealing with other people are key areas of importance. Before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to these study questions. In what sort of projects are you involved personally? And can you identify 3 different types of project in which you may become involved? What are the core skills you believe a project manager and leader should possess? Moving on to slide 3, let's answer the question, what is a project? Well, a project can be defined as, and I quote, ... an endeavour in which human or machine, material and financial resources are organised in a novel way to undertake a unique scope of work or given specification within constraints of cost and time so as to deliver beneficial change by quantitative and qualitative objectives. Well, that's a fair mouthful, but it is very much a fact about project work that we do organise resources, we do have a specification, we do have cost issues and time issues, and the whole point is that we assess the success of a project by quantitative and qualitative objectives. Now, in his writing, Turner, who's quoted in the bibliography, he proposes 5 functions of project-based management. And those 5 functions are organisation, scope, time, quality and cost. And this is an enhanced version of the traditional quality, cost and time model, adding the organisational context and the scope of the project. Now, his book, The Handbook of Project-Based Management, Improving the Process for Achieving Strategic Objectives, is well worth consulting. So, having defined what a project is and pointed you in the direction of the expanded model of project-based management as proposed by Turner, the study assignment is to download the article from the internet, and the article is Turner's 5 Functions of Project-Based Management and Situation Leadership in IT Services Projects, and this is published in the International Journal of Project Management, and the reference is issue 21, 2003, pages 583 to 591. Now, it's available on the internet from www.elsevier.com/locate/IJPROMAN. That stands for the International Journal of Project Management. Now, a Google search using this article title will also enable you to download a PDF of the article for free. So, think about what we mean by projects and have a look at Turner's work before you move on to the next slide. Now, in slide 5 we look at the roots of project management. The modern approach to project management can be traced back to the middle of the 20th century, when the US Navy's Special Project Office was formed in 1957 to support the nuclear submarine project. And a Google search on PERT will produce a number of useful references to this starting point. The PERT method, which stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique, was established to analyze the tasks involved in completing a complex project. And a key feature of PERT is the identification of the critical path, that minimum amount of time that the project will consume given the various activities involved and how they relate to each other. Now in the next slide we see a simple but typical approach to the PERT idea. But before we move on to slide 6, I'd like you to give some thought to the study question. Firstly, can you think of a simple, time-bounded project, such as making a cup of tea, which you could represent as a set of activities, such as fill the kettle, turn it on, assemble cups, tea or tea bags, etc., and list out those activities so that you would actually identify every action that would be needed to be taken? Once you've done that, you can move on to slide 6. In slide 6 we see a sample PERT project management plan, and in this slide we see how one relatively simple project can be represented in a two-dimensional graphical form. There are 5 milestones or states which must be reached. Milestone 1 is the starting point, where resources have been assembled. 2 activities then take place in parallel. Activity A, which is estimated to take 3 months, leading to milestone 2, and activity B, which is estimated to take 4 months, leading to milestone 3. Milestone 2 is then followed by 2 activities, D, which takes 1 month, and E, which takes 2 months. D leads to milestone 4, which is then followed by activity F, which has a duration of 3 months, leading to milestone 5. Milestone 3 is followed by activity C, which leads directly to milestone 5. Now all activities are estimates in terms of duration, and it can be seen that there is slack in activity E, the start of which could be delayed by up to 2 months, while D and F are underway, and activity A, which could be delayed by a month. Any of these delays within those limits will not increase the total length of the project time. Now this is an important point in terms of project planning for the use of resources, and is an issue to which we will refer later. Now before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to the study questions. Can you now represent the process of making the cup of tea with the activities you identified in the previous slide as a PERT chart along the lines shown in this slide? Are there any resource and timing issues you can identify from your diagram? For example, you cannot put the kettle on to boil until you've filled the kettle with water. A very simple but straightforward example. So have a go at the study questions before you move on to slide 7. Moving on to slide 7, let's think about the nature of projects and the types of projects that exist. Now there are many types of project which we're going to identify later in this session. Project working has traditionally been associated with large-scale production projects or office relocation, new product development and so forth. However, today many types of projects exist, many of which are not technical or engineering in nature, and it's the application of project planning, PERT type techniques and other project methods such as Gantt charts to this wide variety of project types which concerns us in this module. Now whatever the type of project, 3 issues invariably arise. Firstly, there is the issue of the quality standard to which the project is being worked, the specification. Is it a quick and dirty solution which is being sought, or is the emphasis on high quality standards which is required? To what extent is cost involved? Is the project aiming to produce a Rolls-Royce solution, or would maybe a Skoda solution be fit for purpose? Thirdly, what is the time pressure situation in terms of when the project has to be completed? When these 3 issues are combined, they produce the quality, cost, time triangle. In addition, the project takes place within a context in the organisation. And we will see these two aspects of project working in the next slide. But before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to the following study questions. Where was the emphasis in a project in which you've been involved? Was it on minimizing cost, working to the shortest timescale, or working to the highest quality? If the balance had shifted between these variables, what would have been the impact on the project? In slide 8, we move on to the basics of the project. We see the quality cost time triangle within the organisational context. And in this slide we can see how the three core issues of quality, cost and time fit together. This enables the focus to be determined in terms of maximising quality at the possible expense of increased cost and or taking longer to complete the project, or minimising cost with the result of a possible reduction in quality and taking longer over the work, or completing the project in minimum time, incurring possible extra cost and a reduction in quality. Now, at the same time, the context of the project is shown as being taken into account organisational politics, the personal objectives of those involved, business pressures, external pressures such as carbon footprint issues, stakeholder perceptions, and so forth. So the actual project and its quality, cost and time factors take place within this slightly more complex context, and the effective project leader and manager needs to know how to handle the politics of the external dimension as well as the quality, cost and time issues. So before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to the study questions. Which of the three core issues of quality, cost and time tend to dominate in your organisation? Is it an organisation that wants to get the stuff out of the door quickly, or does it want to create Rolls-Royce rather than Skoda solutions? Or does it just want to do things as cheaply as possible and as quick as possible? Or what? What is the mix? Where does your organisation focus? Secondly, what factors exist in your organisation which tend to make project working more difficult than perhaps it should be? Do organisational politics come into the scene? Are there specific business pressures? Are there external stakeholder issues and perhaps personal conflicts within the organisation? So just give some thoughts to those questions before moving on to the next slide. In slide 9 we move on to consider again the different types of projects. Now, as we've already said, for many people the word project is associated with large construction or defence projects. However, many types of project exist in the modern world, and many new style projects exist which vary in size, length and complexity. They can include installing ICT systems, office moves, testing a new product, acquiring or merging with another organisation, an internal change programme and a host of other areas of work. Now, whether you operate in manufacturing, financial services, retail, the health service or local government, there is usually one person, the project leader, who is in charge. And during this module on project management, we're going to be looking at the issue of effective project leadership, that is, getting the best out of the project team and individuals within the team, as well as project management, which tends to relate to the planning and control aspects. So, before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to the following study questions. What are the main types of project which are undertaken in your organisation as a whole? Which type of project do you personally prefer? Why do you show that preference? Slide 10. So now we've thought around some of the general issues of project management, let's perhaps propose a new definition of project management. Now, in their book Project Leadership, Briner, Geddes and Hastings propose a new definition of project management which leads to our developing a comprehensive view of what projects are all about. New style project management is managing the visible and invisible team to achieve the objectives of the stakeholders. And there are 6 useful concepts that underpin this idea. Firstly, there is the visible team, those people working directly on the project, full-time or part-time. Secondly, there is the invisible team, those people who contribute indirectly to the work of the visible team, either inside or outside the organisation. Next, we have the multiple stakeholders, all those people having an interest in the project. And then there is the creation of organisational team working, where the project leader promotes working practices which are cross-functional and they cross barriers within the organisation. Understanding and working with the organisational context, particularly with regards to organisational politics, is important. And then there's taking into account the people issues involved and developing effective relationships, promoting a sense of esprit de corps within the project team and handling possible conflicts between team members. So, having proposed this new definition of project management, which is much more about leadership than pure management planning, have a look at the study questions before you move on to the next slide. Firstly, can you name the people who are in your visible team? And then can you name the people who are in your invisible team? Who are your other major stakeholders? Moving on to slide 11, effective project managers and leaders need to know how to understand and handle the people factor just as much as the technical planning factor. Problems in project working are often caused as much by people issues as by technical or resource issues. And during this module we will be looking at people issues both in terms of team working and dealing with individuals, and how problems may be avoided by effective project leadership as well as management. One of the sources of problems in project working is that technical people often have little experience or appetite for handling the people issues. And one of the key issues to be addressed in organisations today is the accelerating rate of change, which causes many people anxiety, reduces their risk-taking preference and inhibits excellence performance in the workplace. And most organisations are struggling to cope with increasing regulation and risk of litigation, with disaffected employees with low morale and complexity in general terms. So life is tough, and the effective project leader and manager needs to know how to understand and handle the people factor effectively. Now, before moving on to the next slide, give some thought to the following study questions. Firstly, how can effective project leadership help to develop effective project team working? To what extent is your organisation affected by increasing regulation, risk of litigation, morale and stress issues, and complexity? Just give some thought to those questions before moving on to the next slide. So now let's set the scene in slide 12 for looking at some of the issues involved in effective project leadership. For some people it's tempting to think of project leadership as being team or front line level in nature. In fact, leadership operates at a wide range of levels, and it's convenient to consider 3 levels in particular, all of which are relevant to project working. Firstly, there is strategic leadership, which is creating the grand plan for the project, focusing on the big picture and understanding the strategic fit of the project. Secondly, there is operational leadership, which is about putting the grand plan into practice and developing the day-to-day activity on the project. Thirdly, it's true that there is a team level of leadership with specific outcomes required, time issues and specific boundaries. These 3 levels of leadership all take place within the culture of the organisation and its project organisation, and both the project teams and the organisation as a whole needs to stay in touch with its environment, the business context, in order to stay current in its thinking. Well, we can see how these 3 levels of leadership, the culture and the context or environment, relate in the next slide. But before moving on to that slide, just give some thought to these study questions. At which level of leadership activity do you spend most of your time? Strategic, operational, or frontline? Can you outline how the project on which you're currently working fits into the grand plan of your organisation? Just give some thoughts to these before moving on to the next slide. So in slide 13 we can see these three levels of leadership and the culture and the environment in which the leadership takes place represented in a convenient little map. Here we see the strategic level, which takes into account the strategic fit of the project, the operational level, which relates to the day-to-day working of the project activity, and the frontline level, which is about achieving the task, building a team and working with individuals to unlock their personal contributions. The extent to which these processes are encouraged or inhibited is determined largely by the culture of the organisation on an ongoing basis and the climate in terms of short-term atmosphere. Finally, the project leader needs to take account of the context in which the project is taking place, both within the organisation and in the business environment outside the organisation. So give some thought to these study questions. Does the way you are working with your project reflect what is happening in the business context or business environment in which your organisation is currently working? Is your effort at all three levels of strategic, operational and frontline levels balanced, or does one level tend to be where you spend most of the time and place most of your energy? Let's give some thought to those questions before moving on to the next slide. So in slide 14, let's talk about the strategic side of project management. We've already suggested that project leaders and managers need to be strategic as well as operating effectively on a day-to-day basis and creating specific outcomes from the project working in a timely manner. Now, strategy is about the big picture, the overall system, thinking on main beam, to use a driving analogy, and being aware of the long-term results of various actions. And most writers on leadership would argue that leaders need to have a vision of how things will be when they've achieved their aims and objectives. And the same is true for project leaders. A vision is a picture of the future as we would wish it to be, and we can develop our visioning skills by imagining that the project is now completed, thinking about what that will mean to us in terms of day-to-day activity and working. And it's useful to pretend that the project is complete and to imagine what we would see, hear and feel as a result of the completion of the project work. In this way, we can influence our unconscious minds to work towards the completion of the project in an effective way. Now, under pressure, we tend to focus in on our particular work and to develop tunnel vision. Thinking outside the box and examining the wider issues is important for the project manager in order to keep his or her creative processes working effectively. This approach to seeing the project in context and how its successful completion will affect the organisation is very important. We all face uncertainty in both our organisational and personal lives today. A key skill in modern strategic thinking is that of scenario analysis. In this process, various elements of uncertainty are considered and clustered to form a map which may be of two or more dimensions. The easiest way to develop an ability in scenario analysis is to cluster the uncertainties on two scales, thus creating a 2x2 matrix which displays four possible future scenarios. This type of thinking can be very useful in adjusting or modifying project aims and objectives. The bibliography at the end of this session gives references to enable you to explore scenario planning in more depth. Now, before moving on to the next slide, just give some thought to these study questions. To what extent do you engage in strategic thinking as compared to operational or front-line thinking? Do you have a vision for what life will be like when you've completed the project? What uncertainties can you identify as regards your project which could be clustered to create a 2x2 matrix resulting in four possible scenarios of the future for the project? Moving on to slide 15. Project evaluation, hard and soft measures. Now we're going to consider project evaluation in some depth in a later session. At this stage it's important to realize each project has detailed success criteria and sets of specifications which the project has to meet. Success factors do vary, and at one end of the spectrum they may be specific quantitative issues. At the other end, such as in a feasibility study, success may be identified as defining the questions to ask, the issues to study, or defining a suitable output. Hard criteria includes meeting deadlines, meeting performance specifications, adhering to quality standards, and meeting cost, budget and resource issues. Soft criteria may include the cooperation within the project team, morale level, a positive image for the project, total quality issues, commitment level within the team, effective risk and reputation management, and ethical issues. We'll explore some of these things in a later session. In the meantime, please give some thought to these study questions. What would define success in terms of any projects in which you are currently engaged? What would be the hard success criteria? What would be the soft success criteria? Finally, in this session 1 of project management, we're just going to talk a little bit about managing stakeholder relationships. Project managers need to develop effective relationships with their major stakeholders as well as with both their visible and invisible teams. Building a background knowledge base of a project's major stakeholders is important. Who are they? How did they get to their current position? What is their status? What issues are important to them? What sort of people are they? How do they like to be kept up to date? Do they have any negative feelings or assumptions about the project and its team? Do they want to keep their distance from the project, or are they keen to develop close working relationships? So, before we finish this session, just give some thought to these study questions and then we'll have a few words about the bibliography. The first study question is as follows. What's the important issues you can identify about the backgrounds of 3 major stakeholders with the project in which you are currently engaged? What sort of people are they? How easy is it to talk and do business with them? What actions can you take to promote effective working relationships with your stakeholders? Now, to finish off this first session of project management, a few words about the references. A very useful book is that by Briner, Geddes and Hastings called Project Leadership. It's very useful because it talks very much about the leadership aspects and the human aspects as much as it does about the planning and control aspects. We're going to talk about the planning and control aspects in more detail later in this particular module. The next thing is to perform an internet search using Google or another search engine, because there's a rich source of material on project management. Then a key figure in project management thought processes is Turner, whose books and articles based on the 5-factor model are extremely useful. And that one particular article about project-based management and situation leadership in IT services projects gives you a real insight into his thinking on effective project management and leadership. And then finally, if you want to get into scenario planning, there are a number of books on the subject, but perhaps the most useful, because it gives all the references that are useful, is that by Jill Ringland, and it's called Scenario Planning. It's a relatively recent publication. It's the 2nd edition, published in 2006, and that will lead you into all sorts of areas, including the work by Shell and other people. So thank you for studying session 1 of this module on project management. I look forward to speaking with you in session 2. Thank you very much.